Northwestern was my third railroad. My fourth one was some short line based in Omaha. I forget what the name of it was. So these are photographs that I took working between Chicago and Clinton, Iowa, at a time when we didn't get too much flack about carrying a camera on board a locomotive and taking photographs. So I would always tell people too, my wife, if she was close enough, would probably give me an elbow about now. I did not get paid to take photographs, but I did not take photographs unless I was getting paid. And that main line between Chicago and, actually between Chicago and Council Bluffs, Omaha, has always been a busy line. And something we gotta go. I want to go the other way. There we go. And stuff's just going this way and that way. And, okay, we're going to start in Chicago, and hopefully you know where this is, because I don't. I was just the engineer on the job. I would get called for some of these strange jobs that would leave from various Norfolk Southern or CSX yards in Chicago that I had no information at all about. I would ask who the conductor was, and a lot of times it would be Doug Dahl. I said, oh, well, okay, I'll take the job, I'll go.
Hey, Phil, I know
Yes.
where that's at. The
Well, yeah.
Northwestern mainline.
That's right, it's someplace in Chicago. There we go. And this is way, way, way south and looking right at the Sears Tower, or whatever it's called. The fun of it getting on foreign railroads is that every one of them had a different signal system. And it was all covered in what was called the CORA book, which is what Chicago Operating Rules Association. It was a 3-ring binder that was about 4 inches thick. And it described each route and what the signals were like on each route. And again, this is actually headed straight north. And no, I don't really know where I was at. They told me to turn the headlight on bright and follow that.
I think that's Ash Street, Phil.
Hmm?
That was Ash Street right there of the tower.
Okay.
Is that the Bureau CT?
Yeah.
I'll go with you, okay.
Yeah.
And this is up by Quincy, coming off the Wood Street line, piggyback or container trains. The Falcons or piggyback trains, there was a couple of those jobs that went to Illinois crews. The rest of them are handled by terminal crews that would take them to Berkeley and then hand them off to a road crew. But they would putz around and finally get off the line, get onto the main line, and of course go right to the 8th notch and smoke out the whole neighborhood.
Must be a steam engine.
These are the GP50s. I have no love for GP50s at all. They got me fired once at least. And toward the end of their career, they were always over on the UP doing mileage equalization, so we didn't have to fuss with them anymore. And this is coming west out of the city yet. Okay, I have some stuff in here for the model builders, which is a big part of the hobby too. a Jeep, SD40 freshly sandblasted at 40th Street in preparation for a new paint job. And I hope you pay very close attention to the dividing line between the yellow and the green and the position of the number on the cab so that you get it right. This is at Vale River Forest. We're on a scoot and we are obviously just waiting for piggybacks to come in. And, oh, come on, where am I? Going under the belt, just west of 40th Street.
Rocks in the distance.
Yeah.
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 The 6600s were SD 38s, and those locomotives spent their working career in the Northwestern, generally in the 8th notch, handling transfers and hump jobs. And as soon as that short line from Omaha took over, all the 6600s vanished and went to Nebraska. I had 12 years on the Rock Island, but I had nothing to do with this. This is a hump shove with proviso buckled. Okay, 5500s, GP40s, the very first ones built, went to the New York Central, and then to Penn Central, and then to Conrail, and then went on a used market. And of course, the Northwestern couldn't pass up a used locomotive. And they bought them and painted them and put them in storage. And as they needed them, they'd check the oil and water and fill them up with gas and fire them up, and they all worked. And they were an engineer's locomotive that you open the throttle and they would grunt and pull, and you open the throttle further and they would grunt harder and pull harder. The only problem we had was in the wintertime, because they were old locomotives by the time we got them, and the doors and windows would leak like crazy in the winter. End up with snowdrifts building up across the cab floor. A business train leaving Proviso early in the morning. I tell people that Larry Provo, when he was president of the Northwestern, about every month or so, he would run a business train west. He would go to Omaha, and a week or two later, there would be another UP freight train routed over the Northwestern. Lombard, Illinois, that's the Great Western going over the top. And when I would catch that job running on the Great Western, the conductor knew that when we got up on this overhead, I would check my watch, and if there's a possibility of the train being anywhere close, I would stop and take pictures. So it works both ways. This is also Lombard. This is west of Grace Street. And Lombard again. All this stuff, it looks different now. And that's a way freight working the main line. Okay, this took an explanation. This is putting down welded rail. That's what I should have my laser pointer here. The end of the rail that's down in the lower part of the picture is chained to the track work. So that rail is going to stay there, and we're going to shove an entire train a quarter of a mile and set that stick of rail down on the ground. A little bit short of motive power on the Northwestern, so they got a Penn Central unit. Then they couldn't find a third rail, so. This is an early attempt at a GPS system on the Northwestern. Actually, I was taking detailed photographs. This is a torpedo boat Jeep, a GP7 with the air reservoirs on top and an extra big fuel tank underneath. And I wanted to make sure that I had the engine number recorded. So Switchman still had chalk at that time, so I used some Switchman chalk, put the number up on the locomotive.
So where was that electric Penn Central unit going?
I think it went up to Union, didn't it?
Okay.
I think so.
We had a lot of stuff come through West Chicago that would, be parked for a while until they were running something up toward Union. This is from that short line in Omaha. And they had a problem because it doesn't have a cab on it. So GP30s for people who like GP30s. Okay, can I tell a story about this one?
Sure.
GP30, the second one is an RS11, something like that, for the people that know these things. It came to us painted in tuxedo colors of gray and black, another Southern Railway, and it was from their subsidiary, the Carolina and Northwestern. So it was already lettered C&NW. So the Northwestern just changed the colors and left it as C&NW. Anyway, I had these two units on the Nelson Turn, which ran from West Chicago out to Nelson and shoved their train into the yard at Nelson and picked up another train and came right back into West Chicago. It was a hustling job. It was strictly for miles. You couldn't make any overtime on the job at all because it made so many miles going out there and coming back on one job. But coming out of the yard track at Nelson, knowing what an Alto would do, I hit the sanders on the Jeep 30 on that 812, had the sanders running, and reached up and isolated the 812, and then put the throttle to the 8th notch. And of course, the 812 didn't say anything, but the Alco back there started going ba-woompa, 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 and pouring out black smoke like you wouldn't believe. But anyway, my son likes to take pictures like this too, of sunsets and sunrises, but I always had trains in my pictures. This is the coach yard at West Chicago. And when I was a little bitty boy, I used to be able to see stuff like this in West Chicago. The Class H 484, what is that, the 24? I took this with my baby Brownie special camera, which cost $1.98 at Marshall Field store downtown Chicago.
Do you know what year that is?
It would be 1951. That's during my 35-cent era. A roll of film cost 35 cents. Processing at the local drugstore cost 35 cents. Trains magazine cost 35 cents. My allowance for the week was 35 cents. Inflation has set in since then. And this is about 1960 at West Chicago. The building in the background is the Aurora Branch Railroad, Turner Junction, Depot, whatever. It has been preserved. It's been moved now to the other side of the tracks, and it's tucked in behind the public library, between the library and the museum, actually. And it is occasionally open. And this is mainline power back then, 2 Jeeps. It must have taken a long time to get to Clinton. Well, they had the 16-hour law, so he probably used it all up. And this is just on the east side of West Chicago. And I had a good friend lived on the north side of the tracks, and my son lived on the south side of the tracks, and we'd come into town and blow, shave and a haircut 6 pence. This is right in downtown West Chicago, the EJ&E, the rebuilt double-engine Baldwin transfer units. Of course, this is the route that CN has now. It's interesting when the wind is out of the southwest, we can tell by the noise whether it's a CN train going through town or a this is Sunday, I can't say that, can I? That other railroad from east and west, because the Canadian national trains have to go across 3 main lines, so they're going company to get across the diamonds. And the east-west trains have only 1 line to go across, so they just go company. So you can tell who's moving out there. And that is a perpetual maintenance headache. Taconite, for those of you who keep track of stuff like that, the routing on taconite and iron ore and all that kind of stuff used to ebb and flow and change. I think these are all Masabi cars that the Northwestern bought cheap and nothing wasted. Just stenciled them, put them in service for hauling taconite. This is in West Chicago Yard. And we never liked to handle these things because they would leak. And if you're familiar with taconite, it's like little iron ball bearings, and trying to walk on that kind of stuff is almost impossible. And of course, we have to have a nighttime shot, and as much as the railroad generally operates only nights, weekends, and holidays. And for those of you who aren't paying real close attention to the Weather Channel, this is coming. This is super winter, like 78. I've never been so cold and so wet. This is right downtown West Chicago. The bridge has been replaced. We have a new bridge over the top now for Wilson Avenue. And what's the number? Is that 400? I know there are experts on the business cars. Northwestern had quite a fleet. Office cars, sleepers, theater cars, diners, all sorts of stuff. There goes one with 3 of those cars from Omaha and then 3 Northwestern cars. And like I say, that business train would run out to Omaha, and within a week or 2 there would be another one of those trains coming off the UP. this one was taken. Must be a long time ago. It's got a steam locomotive on it.
Well, if you can read, Phil.
I had a good buddy that was on the extra board with me at West Chicago, Randy Ferguson, and we were sort of sharpshooting back and forth to see if we could catch this job at the 1385, and usually when it was running, there'd be all sorts of officials in the cab because they all wanted to say that they had run a steam locomotive. And finally, they were running it between West Chicago and Geneva, and Carl Ulrich had come down from mid-continent to Mother Hen 1385. Of course, I'd known Carl for a long time. I said, how about you get me in the seat, you know, just shove some of these officials out of the way. So he set me down in the seat, and I got to run down toward Geneva. But before we even got to Geneva, the alarm bells were ringing. The F units that we had in the train were overheating. So I had to abandon the 1385 and go back and play Mother Hen to the F units. And Joe remembers this one because this was parked right in his backyard. He got the kids out there to see it. And there's the theater car and the Superdome. And a sleeper or two and an office car. And this again is right in downtown West Chicago, within walking distance, an Amtrak detour with the presidential Fs on it. At the end of West Chicago Yard, scoots and switch engines and freight trains, all sorts of stuff. If you look at the cab on that 4470, there's nobody in the cab because I'm standing out here on the ground taking a picture. Nobody in the cab there either. This was WX Interlocking at the west end of West Chicago, which is now, what do they call it, Crest Road Interlocking. The Union Pacific identifies all their interlockings by the road that you use to get into that. Always like this one. This is taking a scoot equipment down to Geneva. This is when the scoots terminated, the runs terminated at Geneva or originated at Geneva. So you get out of the coach yard at West Chicago and run down to Geneva and get set up to come east again. And we were going down side by side with this westbound freight train. This is one I'm really not entirely sure where it is. Out there someplace. Oh, okay. One of those say it is. We could do a dissertation on automatic train control, centralized traffic control, automatic block system, which were, one was laid on top of the other on top of the other on the Northwestern. Anywhere between Chicago and Council Bluffs was automatic train control. And between Elmhurst and Nelson was CTC. Beyond Nelson, it was ABS. And if you head other directions, you'd be on track warrants. There was a job came into Clinton, a road job came into Clinton, and they couldn't get the front cab door open on the locomotive. They finally pried the side window open on the cab and simply jumped out into a snowdrift. And I don't know how the outbound crew got back up in there. Working a Jordan ditcher as a snowplow. And since we're running double track, it only put the wing out on the field side of the ditcher. So, and then push real hard to try to get the snow to move out into the cornfields. And I had one time, I told the brakeman to go stand on the end of the locomotive and watch the wheels on the rear of that Jordan ditcher. And they got too far away from the rail to let me know, because pushing that hard on it would lift the rear end of that ditcher up. So. And I think this is, as I remember, is on Crest Hill. We were dumping snow in front of westbound, and he was pushing snow in front of us. And, This was an easy run. They had a guy up front doing all the hard work. And I was just sitting back in the second unit taking photographs. At company expense. This would be out at DeKalb. They got the DeKalb switch engine and waiting in the clear for a mainline freight to go by. And the last time I looked, that coaling tower is still there on DeKalb. They're a little bit afraid to try to knock it down. They learned their lesson from the Rock Island. Rock Island had one of these at Morris, Illinois. And they had all the experts in place, and they put dynamite under the legs on one side. Figured they'd blow the legs out of one side, the whole thing would tip over into the cornfields. And instead, when they blew the legs, it shuddered a little bit and then sat right straight down on the double track main line. So that's why the tower of DeKalb is still there. The one at Nelson is still there. Judging from the number, this is probably the Troy Grove job, the sand hauling job. And again, meeting another train. This is what the cornfields look like late in the season. This looks like Rochelle. This is Rochelle. warehouse, Del Monte warehouse down there on the right. And we'd swap cars with the Burlington and spot the plant. And used to be a lot of business there. A Jeep in need of a paint job. This is on Dixon Hill. He's coming down here, westbound. That's Red Turner. He's the conductor on the Dixon Way Freight. And this is just west of Dixon. And officially this is Bowman's Cabin Road is where we are here. This is just east of Dixon. Couldn't get a good shot of this from the cab. This is actually a Spino rail grinder train. And nowadays, Spino has their own special locomotives. At that time, they would have the train set up and you just put a Northwestern Jeep on it, and they would jury rig a rheostat control on the load regulator because they wanted the train to move at 2 miles an hour while they were grinding rail. And of course, you get on something like Dixon Hill with it, where just getting up the hill is enough of a problem, and then they want precisely 2 miles an hour, and they twiddle with this rheostat, watch the speedometer real close, hope you don't get yelled at. At one time, there was a lot of business in downtown Dixon, and IC was also in Dixon. They've since abandoned that line completely. So there was actually interchange with the IC in Dixon, and both the IC and the Northwestern would go down the town track and go all the way to the east end of Dixon along the river to the cement plant, service a cement plant. There's another one of those presidential trains. And coming down Dixon Hill again.
Yes.
This is one of my artsy photographs. Crew change at Nelson Yard Office. Two units and 2 cars. I wonder if they could make the time. This is the west leg of the Y at Nelson, so that mainline train is coming from Clinton, turns the corner and heads south, goes down to South Pekin. And the track in the foreground is the east leg of the Y, and trains would come up that east leg and go on the main line and head for Proviso. Another crew change at Nelson Yard. Back at that time, they did not stop a train to make a crew change. The inbound train crew, whoever was up on the locomotive, the brakeman, and if the conductor was up there too, they would bail off as the train was moving along, and the outbound crew would climb on and occupy the cab and get settled down in the cab, and when that outbound engineer was in the seat,
then the inbound engineer could get off. But they wouldn't stop the train, keep the train moving the whole time, which I guess is in violation of the rules now, so. There they are coming up and they're making their crew change right there, but they're not stopping. This is out at Nelson. You can tell because it's got signals over 4 tracks. The tower at Nelson, NY Tower, and an order board, distinctive triangle with the green signal is an order board. And of course there's a coaling dock in the background. The Rock River Bridge, if you notice there's a new piece of steel going crosswise on the bridge. They had a mainline crew one night, had orders to pick up a car out of Nelson Yard. So they stopped their train, went down the west leg of the Y and picked up the car and the right number, and came out, put it on their train and took off. Unfortunately, it was a high load, and it smacked right into the Rock River Bridge and tore up some of the truss work and stuff like that. So they patched it up with a new hunk of steel across the top. This is that Rock River Bridge from the other direction. And the coaling tower. The weed-grown tracks are the leads down to the southern Illinois line. That's the Nelson Yard office there in the background. During super winter, they rigged us up with an air blaster wand that we would hook up to the main reservoir hose on the rear of the locomotive and go down through the yard and blast and blow snow out of the switch points. And it was snowing so hard that by the time you ran up the lead and had all the switches clean, they would all be filled in behind you. So I don't know, we only did that once that I remember, so. This is at Nelson. And that's a train from Clinton turning a corner and heading south at Nelson. We're getting into Sterling here. Over on the left, you see a string of gondolas loaded with scrap. Every night out of Proviso, a train numbered 259 would have like 60 gondola loads of scrap to take to Sterling. So it wasn't a real high priority job, and people didn't like to catch it, except when you did get to Sterling, you'd set out almost your entire train and maybe have a handful of cars and run to Clinton. So. This is all at Sterling. They captured a UP caboose to use on the way freight out there. In the days before all-knowing computers, you could actually steal something like that and keep it on your railroad for quite a while. I know there was a Rock Island caboose that ran out of South Pekin for a long time. more Jeep 30s for you Jeep 30 fans in the crowd. Okay, 4521. I see they have the air conditioner on. It opened the front door of the Jeep and use the switch broom and jam the switch broom between the railing and the door handle to hold the door open. It's the only way you got air in the cab, really. And there is a part of the scrap pile at Sterling. The pile at good times would be about a mile long, a pile of scrap that high, a mile long. And at that time, old man Dillon was still around, still living, and still working. And he would come down and inspect the scrap that was coming in. And he would climb up on gondola cars and check it all out, make sure he was getting good scrap. And his son wanted desperately to retire. His son was like 68, something like that. But the old man was in his 80s and still working, so the son couldn't retire. And of course, the steel mill at Sterling used steam locomotives up until 1980 something. These being engines they bought from the Grand Trunk Western as scrap. They converted them to burning oil so they didn't have to worry about a fireman shoveling coal. And when we'd be working the switch engine at Sterling, we'd be right alongside the steam locomotives. And they would set out loads for us to pick up. They'd cut their steam locomotive away and we'd move in, tie on with our Jeep, and away we went. There's my faithful helpers out there. And this is what you can see just looking out the window. What?
That's it?
That was the switchman at Sterling.
Oh, okay.
Switch ladder, gloves.
Switch person.
Switch lady.
Well, yes. Some of these jobs, I see that with archives that have identified photographs of engine crews, and they identify the engineer and the guy next to the engineer as a firefighter. Because you can't say fireman anymore, so he's a firefighter. They got rid of the steam locomotives, and number one is a rebuilt Baldwin switcher that they got from the Northwestern. The other two locomotives are brand new from EMD, SW 1501, something like that. Or that used to be a Northwestern. Okay, after the old man was gone, his mansion in Sterling became a museum, and they figured they had to have a steam locomotive on display at his mansion. So they dragged one of the steamers out, and they got it right where they wanted it on the main line, but it had to be over in old man Dillon's backyard. So they called out Hulcher, the re-railing experts, and they looked at the job and they said, but it's on the rail. We don't know what to do with it when it's on the rail. They said, well, knock it off the rails, then you know how to pick it up and move it. So they did. It was a big D9 cats with the side booms, and they just grab hold of that thing and walk it across. Sunset along the Rock River. Okay, this is going into Clinton, Iowa. Finally. I didn't do that. And I've always wondered that derailments like this are always identified by the name of the locomotive engineer, even though the locomotive engineer had nothing to do with it. It's the conductor's responsibility. I do have photographs of my first wreck. Put 19 cars in the ditch because the conductor told me we were on a good track and could highball.
Conductor error.
And this is going across the backwaters of the Mississippi at Clinton. 1909, and that bridge is still in service. They talk about replacing it by coming off the bluffs on the Illinois side and going through the air toward the west end of Clinton Yard. And this is the bridge operator. And if we have any trolley car fans here, those are all trolley car controllers. And the motors that turn the bridge, this is on a swing span, the motors are trolley car motors. There's 4 of them up there. And most of the time they can turn the bridge using 2 motors. But when the wind comes up and catches that bridge, you'll have to use all 4 motors in order to turn the bridge. And a modern transmission, they must use grease by the bucket load on that. And when the operator is returning a bridge to its normal position, they have what are called Conley locks that lock the rails in the correct alignment. And he can see what he's doing during daylight. At night, there's a single light bulb way down at the far end of the bridge, and he knows he has to get that light bulb lined up through some of the lattice work, and then he'll be properly aligned. Modern technology. This is what it looks like when the bridge is open. And yes, they have run cars off the end of that track.
Conductors.
The conductor did that, yes. And that's Little Harry, the switch tugboat at Clinton. It works only at Clinton, repositioning barges. This is out front of the Clinton Yard office, making a crew change. And there's another crew change out in front of the Clinton Yard office. Usually Amtrak would show up on the Northwestern every time it rained on the Burlington, because the Burlington would flood out. Here you go on that tuxedo paint scheme on the Southern, the gray and black and gold trim. This is running on, actually right there, he's on the dry line at Davenport, Rock Island, and Northwestern. It's a Milwaukee Road train down from Dubuque that wiggles across the Northwestern main line to get to the dry line to go down to the Quad Cities. And of course, I'm on a eastbound Northwestern, and I would like to go home, but I've got a red signal, and we wait for the Milwaukee to amble across and get out of our way. The old passenger depot at Clinton, the last time I looked, was still standing. They're trying to figure out, you know, useful things to do with it. So. And let's see, 1909, so that bridge is now 112 years old, is that right? 112 years old. I don't know. Still works. Okay, I usually try to end my show with a caboose or a weight car. It seems the appropriate way to end something. And here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 of the northeastern cars. They call them northeastern cars because it's a standard on the northeastern railroads. And again, they showed up on the market used and cheap, so the Northwestern bought them. But if you don't like those, and you'd rather have a bay window way car, we can have as many as you want. This is the last, I think one of the last big jobs they did at the Clinton car shops was every single bay window car they found, they painted. And they got those all out. And of course, the shops are now completely gone. There's a nice little parkway through Clinton with Highway 30. So, anyway, okay. Never get between a railroad man and beans, because you're supposed to get lunch at noon. So I talked real fast and I skipped half the stories. But, we can break for lunch now, okay?
Thank you very much, Phil. Very, very entertaining and interesting. Okay, we're going, like Phil said, we're going to break for lunch. We'll be right next door in the next room. No assigned seats or anything, so just go over there and find yourself a table. We'll take a few minutes to take a bathroom break if you want to. The bathrooms are out the door where we came in and then down to the left. And is there any questions about anything so far? Anything more? Any questions for Phil at this point? I should have asked.
All that scrap that was being hauled from Chicago, what generated that amount of scrap?
Every scrapyard in Chicago contributed.
Did you hear that?
Yes, it
Yeah,
did.
okay.
It's an enormous amount to have trains, that many trains and that large a pile.
Like I say, every night out of Proviso, there'd be like 60 loads of scrap, every single night. And of course, at that time, Northwestern Steel and Wire at Sterling was a full-blown steel mill, only dealing with scrap, and they had electric furnaces to melt the scrap down. And they made structural steel, I-beams, stuff like that. They made fence posts, made all sorts of steel. And it just sort of all went away out there. It's hardly any-
And in the transition era, they scrapped hundreds of steam locomotives
yes.
from dozens of railroads.
Yeah. Well, before the Grand Trunk engines, there were Northwestern and Burlington engines
Yeah.
switching out there at Sterling. Yeah. Yeah. It's,
Most of the scrap now goes across the ocean.
yeah. Well, there's a lot of mini mills around too that take it. There's still, like around Gary, Indiana, there's still a lot of steel production, and a lot of it is from scrap now too, so, rather than new steel.
Is Sterling still in existence in business or not?
I don't know. It went through a couple of radical changes, and it was, I'm not really up to date on it.
They scrapped a lot of the buildings, but most of the buildings that were there actually got cut up and melted down, but they still ship wire.
Yeah,
And at Galt, there's a facility called Simcoe that trucks in a lot of scrap, and it goes into gondolas, and then the Sterling Yard job goes over and gets it every day and shoves it back into the yard. So they ship a few carloads of wire out of there still.
Yeah.